I was the invisible daughter, present in body, absent in their hearts. If love was currency, I was bankrupt in my own home. My siblings wore affection like tailored clothes, stitched to fit and proudly flaunted, while I wore neglect like a second skin. My mother never looked at me the way she looked at them. My father barely acknowledged my existence. And over time I stopped questioning why. I simply accepted that in my family's story, I was a forgotten chapter no one wanted to read. From the outside we looked like a picture-perfect family. People envied our home, our Sunday church appearances, our orchestrated smiles and family portraits. But behind those walls was a silence that screamed. I learned early not to cry too loudly when I was hurt, not to ask for seconds at dinner, and definitely not to dream out loud. Every time I tried to shine, my mother dimmed me with a dismissive glance or a cold word. And my siblings followed her lead like it was gospel. They laughed louder when I fell. They celebrated harder when I failed. I wasn't their sister. I was a mistake that lived among them. I remember my 16th birthday like it happened yesterday. They threw a party for my younger sister the week before. Balloons, cake, the whole neighborhood came. When it was my turn, the house was silent. No one even remembered. I sat on the back steps for hours that night, holding a single cupcake I bought with money I saved from doing odd jobs, the candle flickering in the dark like the last piece of hope I had left. I made a wish that night, not for love, not for acceptance, but for a way out. I wanted to escape them more than I wanted to be loved by them. As I got older, the betrayal turned sharper. They didn't just ignore me anymore, they took from me my ideas, my achievements, even my voice. I once wrote a short story that won a regional contest. My sister claimed it as hers in front of family friends, and my mother applauded her gift. I stood there, blinking back tears, choking on the injustice, but I didn't say a word. Speaking up only ever made things worse. My silence became my shield. But life has a strange way of circling back, doesn't it? It wasn't until tragedy struck that the truth began to unravel. My father passed suddenly, and the family began to argue over the will. That was when I discovered something that cracked my world open. I wasn't their biological daughter. My mother had been married before, and I was the child from that union. My real father was someone else entirely. Someone who had left behind a legacy far greater than anything I'd known. I was his only living heir. That discovery shook me to my core. For years I thought their cruelty was personal, that maybe I'd done something to deserve it. But now I realized, it wasn't about me. It was about fear. About control. They knew who I was. They knew the truth and chose to keep it from me. Not out of protection but out of greed. Out of the twisted desire to keep me small, contained, powerless. And that's where my real story begins. Not in the pain they gave me but in the power I chose to take back. The moment I found out the truth about my lineage, something shifted inside me. It was as though I had been walking through life with a blindfold on, and now, finally, it had been ripped away. I wasn't just the forgotten daughter. I wasn't the accident they tried to hide. I was the daughter of a man they despised, not because he was unworthy, but because he had left me something they couldn't control. Something they couldn't steal. It started with an old letter. My father, my real father, had written it before his death, leaving it with his attorney for the day I turned 25. In the letter he spoke to me like no one ever had. Like I mattered. Like I was seen. He told me how much he loved me, how deeply he regretted leaving me behind, and how he had fought to include me in his will despite the resistance from my mother's side. He knew I would grow up feeling unwanted, and he wrote those words as a promise, that one day I would understand who I truly was. I read that letter over and over, clutching it like a lifeline. I cried not just for the years I had lost but for the love I never received. For the warmth I had only ever imagined. My father had died before I could meet him, but in that moment I felt closer to him than I ever had to the people who raised me. He didn't leave me scraps. He left me everything: land, properties, and most importantly his name. A name they tried so hard to erase. The will stated clearly, everything went to his daughter and only his daughter. Me. The revelation hit my family like a bomb. At first they tried to deny it. My mother screamed that it was forged, that it was a mistake. My siblings looked at me like I had betrayed them, as if I had stolen something that wasn't mine. But I didn't owe them anything. Not after the years they let me starve for love while they feasted on praise and privilege. The house, the businesses, the accounts, everything was in my name. They had spent their whole lives treating me like I was disposable, never realizing I was the one thing they couldn't control. My silence, my obedience, my invisibility, it had all worked in their favor. But now that same silence became power. I didn't need to scream to make them hear me anymore. The truth spoke louder than I ever could. My mother came to me days after the reading, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. She tried to wrap her betrayal in excuses, said she did what she had to do, that she was trying to protect me from a complicated legacy. But I saw through it. She hadn't protected me. She had buried me. She had stolen the love that was meant for me and fed it to her favorites while leaving me to starve in shadows. For once I didn't shrink back. I didn't apologize for existing. I told her the truth she had tried so hard to hide. You never broke me. You just delayed the woman I was meant to become. That day I walked out of that house with nothing but my father's letter and my dignity. And even though I was leaving behind the only home I had ever known, I didn't look back. Because that place had never truly been mine. It was a cage built out of guilt, manipulation, and betrayal. And now I finally had the key. But what they didn't realize, what they still don't understand, is that I'm not just living for myself anymore. I'm living for the girl they tried to silence. The girl who sat on back steps blowing out birthday candles alone. The girl who never stopped hoping, never stopped dreaming, even when no one else believed in her. They made me feel like I was nothing. But in the end it was their cruelty that shaped my strength. And now they have to watch the daughter they abandoned rise. And this time, I won't be invisible. Freedom tasted different when you've lived your whole life on crumbs. At first I didn't know what to do with it. I moved into one of the smaller properties my father left behind. A quiet place by the edge of town, nothing grand or flashy. Just peaceful. It was the first time I ever heard silence without fear. No doors slamming. No whispered insults behind walls. No footsteps to brace for. Just me, and the soft hum of a world that no longer needed my permission to love myself. I would wake up some mornings with my heart still heavy. The kind of heaviness you carry after years of pretending to be okay. I would sit on the porch with a cup of coffee and reread my father's letter, tracing his words like they were the only evidence that I mattered. And for a while they were. But slowly that pain began to transform. The heartbreak, the betrayal, the years of being overlooked. Those memories stopped feeling like open wounds and started becoming fuel. I didn't want revenge in the way most people did. I didn't want to hurt them the way they hurt me. I wanted something worse, for them to watch me thrive without them. For them to realize they lost the one thing they never thought they needed. My mother, for all her cunning, didn't understand legacy. She understood appearances, manipulation, control. But legacy? Legacy is built on truth. My father built his on principles, on hard work, and on loyalty. And now his name was mine to carry forward. It started with small things. I renovated my father's old bookstore, the one my mother claimed was worthless. I turned it into a cozy community space, brought in local authors, hosted free reading clubs for kids who reminded me of myself. Quiet, overlooked, full of stories they weren't brave enough to tell yet. It became something beautiful. It became mine. The whispers started quickly. Family friends who had once pitied me now watched me with a strange mix of awe and confusion. My siblings heard about the relaunch, about the mayor showing up to the opening, about the interviews and the press. My name, the name they tried to erase, was now being spoken with respect. And it wasn't just about the bookstore. I started investing. I took the skills I'd learned in the shadows, observation, resilience, problem-solving, and poured them into my father's other ventures. I didn't need a business degree to rebuild what they tried to ruin. I just needed to remember who I was. They started showing up then. First, my younger sister. The one who used to laugh when I was left out of family events. She came to the bookstore, all smiles and fake apologies, asking if we could reconnect. I saw the hunger in her eyes, not for a relationship but for relevance. She missed the attention. She missed the upper hand. I was kind. I offered her tea, showed her around, even smiled when she tried to rewrite our past with selective memory. But when she asked if I could help her with a small business loan, I looked her in the eye and said gently, I think it's time you learn how to earn something on your own. The way I had to. She left angry, her mask slipping as she slammed the door on her way out. But I didn't flinch. Not anymore. Then came my brother. The golden child. The pride of the family. He didn't bother pretending to care. He came with entitlement, with a voice still sharp from years of barking orders no one ever questioned. He demanded explanations. He called my inheritance a mistake. Said I didn't deserve to be the face of our father's name. And I just listened. Calm, composed. Until he finished his tirade and I said, maybe you were the face. But I was the heart. And our father knew the difference. He never came back after that. But the one visit that rattled me the most came weeks later. My mother. Dressed in black, like she was attending a funeral that hadn't happened. She didn't ask to come in. She just stood at my doorstep and stared as if looking at someone she didn't recognize anymore. You have his eyes, she whispered. His stubbornness. His spirit. I didn't reply. I waited. I made mistakes, she finally said. But I did what I thought was best. You were a reminder of everything I wanted to forget. That stung. But it didn't break me. Because for once she wasn't hiding behind lies. She was telling the truth. I could have lashed out. I could have thrown her words back at her. But instead I said, thank you. Because your rejection became my clarity. She looked at me like she'd seen a ghost. Maybe she had. Maybe the girl she buried so long ago had finally come back to haunt her. Stronger, louder, and unafraid. She walked away without another word. And as her silhouette faded into the distance, I felt lighter than I ever had. The truth is, I didn't need closure. I didn't need revenge. I needed to remember that I was never broken. I was just buried under the weight of someone else's shame. And now I was free. The day my world split open again came with no warning, just the quiet creak of a door and the silence that follows betrayal. I had returned to the city to collect a document for my scholarship renewal. It should have been a quick errand. I wasn't planning to stay long, just a few days to tie up loose ends. I hadn't even told my mother or Lisa that I was back in town. After all, they'd made it abundantly clear I wasn't welcome. But fate has a way of dragging us into the rooms we swore we'd never enter again. And that day I walked into a moment that changed everything. I arrived at my old neighborhood late in the afternoon, just as the sun was starting to sink. My plan was to pass by the bank to pick up a statement for school, then head straight to my hotel. But a familiar voice stopped me as I walked down the street near our old house. It was Lisa's laugh. The kind that always made my stomach twist. Out of instinct more than curiosity, I turned the corner and saw them, Lisa and my mother, sitting outside a restaurant patio sipping wine like old friends. Except they were talking about me. Loud enough that I could hear even from across the road. She has no idea what we did, Lisa said, swirling her wine. Poor thing still thinks Dad left her something. My mother snorted. He did. And we made sure it never reached her. God rest his soul, but he always had a soft spot for that girl. Too soft. My knees almost buckled. I gripped a lamppost to steady myself, rage swirling with heartbreak. So it was true. My suspicions all these years weren't paranoia. The will, whatever it said, they had intercepted it. Manipulated it. Hidden it. She's doing fine though, my mother continued. Somehow got herself a scholarship. Let her stay far away and live that little independent fantasy. Lisa leaned back, smug. She doesn't even know the trust fund exists. That alone makes me sleep better. A trust fund? I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My own father had left me something, maybe a lot. But the two women who raised me had stolen it, buried it, and let me struggle alone. All while pretending they were the victims of my absence. In that moment something inside me cracked. Not the kind of crack that leaves you broken, but the kind that lets something new rise from the ashes. I wouldn't stay silent anymore. I wouldn't play small to make others comfortable. I had spent my entire life swallowing pain, thinking silence was strength. But now I understood. Sometimes strength is screaming the truth so loud that no one can ignore it. I walked away before they could see me. I didn't confront them then because that kind of justice needed precision. It needed patience. I didn't want a reaction. I wanted results. The next few weeks were a blur of attorneys' calls, old friends of my father, and paperwork. I dug into every dusty drawer, tracked down the family lawyer who had gone quiet after Dad's death. And finally, after enough pushing, a copy of the original will surfaced. Dated, signed, and very clear. My father had left me everything. The house. The business shares. A trust fund meant to mature when I turned 25. Everything he had worked for. And they had hidden it, created a fake version with a forged signature. One that gave my mother and Lisa control over everything. The lawyer, visibly shaken, admitted he had been paid to disappear. Paid by my mother. I had evidence. I had the truth. And now I had the power. What came next wasn't vengeance, it was justice. I filed a case. Quietly. Let the system do what it was built for. But I didn't stop there. I took control of my father's shares, began sitting in on board meetings. They hadn't expected me to understand the business side of things, but I did. Years of struggling made me resourceful. I started investing, networking, building, and the whisper started. That's the daughter? I thought she vanished. No, she's the real heir. While my mother and Lisa were summoned to court for fraud and forgery, I walked into rooms that once belonged to my father. Not just as a ghost from the past, but as the woman he had always believed I'd become. It didn't take long for the world they built on lies to collapse. They had stolen years from me, but they couldn't steal my name or the blood that ran through my veins. It's a strange thing, standing in the ruins of someone else's deception while you rise above it. The court case didn't drag on. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records. Forged documents. Even the lawyer who once took the bribe came forward with a written affidavit once he realized he could face jail time for obstruction. My mother sat silent in court, her face pale, her hands trembling. Lisa, well, she still had the audacity to glare at me like I was the villain. They were found guilty of fraud and forgery. While I didn't press for jail time, I wasn't interested in revenge by chains. The court froze their accounts, revoked their access to all the property and assets, and ordered full restitution. Everything they had taken was mine again. By law. By right. But even then I didn't feel triumphant. I felt quiet. Because when you've lived your whole life feeling unwanted, discarded, forgotten, justice doesn't heal everything. It just makes space for healing to begin. I visited my father's grave not long after the final verdict. It was early morning, the sky still gray, dew clinging to the edges of the grass. I brought sunflowers, his favorite. I found it, Daddy, I whispered, kneeling by the headstone. The truth. You tried to protect me, and I finally know that now. Tears slipped down my cheeks, not from pain but from something softer. Maybe peace. I'm going to make you proud. Not just by reclaiming what's mine, but by becoming someone worth your name. I stayed there for a long time. Not because I was lost, but because I had finally found something that had eluded me for so long. Closure. Back in the city, things shifted fast. I was no longer the invisible girl. I was the young woman whose story made headlines in financial circles and boardrooms. I was interviewed, invited to speak at conferences, even approached for collaborations. But I stayed grounded. I didn't flaunt wealth. I didn't throw parties or make grand announcements. I invested wisely. I poured some of the money into youth education programs, scholarships for girls like me who had been abandoned or betrayed. I opened a foundation in my father's name. Because I didn't want to just inherit his wealth. I wanted to carry on his legacy. Lisa tried to reach out. Of course she did. She sent messages through mutual acquaintances, even showed up at one of my public talks, trying to corner me afterward. But I didn't entertain it. Not because I hated her, I was past hate, but because I no longer needed anything from her. Not her apology. Not her recognition. Not even her guilt. My mother. Well, I think she finally realized what she'd lost. Not just money, but the one daughter who had loved her most. The one she pushed aside, erased, betrayed. One evening, I received a letter from her. No return address. Just a few shaky lines. If I could go back and undo it all, I would. I see now what I did. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope you find happiness. I hope you become everything I was too blind to believe you could be. I didn't respond. I couldn't. But I kept the letter. Sometimes healing means choosing silence, not as submission but as strength. And as the days passed, I began to live fully. Not to prove anyone wrong anymore, but to finally prove myself right. The house I live in now isn't just beautiful, it's filled with peace. There are no sharp silences, no rooms that echo with unspoken resentments. Just laughter, music, and the gentle rhythm of a life I built on truth. Some mornings I walk barefoot through the garden with a cup of tea in my hands, watching the sun rise through the trees. And in those quiet moments I don't think about the betrayal anymore. I think about the girl I used to be, the one who cried herself to sleep wondering why she was never enough. She was always enough. She just hadn't been seen. Now she owns her story. Every broken chapter. Every sharp turn. Every scar. And she tells that story to others. Not to relive the pain, but to light a path for someone else who might still be in the dark. I started mentoring young women from similar backgrounds. Girls who've been left behind by family, pushed aside, made to feel invisible. I sit across from them, look them in the eyes, and say the words I wish someone had said to me back then. You are not what they did to you. You are what you choose to become. And that choice is yours. My story didn't end in that betrayal. It began with it. Because sometimes rock bottom isn't the end, it's the foundation. They tried to erase me, but I rewrote my name in bold. Not for revenge, but for redemption. Because I didn't just take back what they stole. I took back me. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of your own strength, don't forget to like, comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps this channel keep telling stories that matter. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, because new, powerful episodes drop every single day. You don't want to miss what's coming next.